Hello, everyone. My name is Eileen Bookestein, and I am the Environmental Education Coordinator here at EGLE. And I want to welcome all of you, everyone here, to our 2023 Earth Day webinar. This is for students of all ages, and we are focused on acting for clean water in our own communities. During this event, all your lines will remain muted. Please feel free if you have any questions to submit them through the Q&A box in the Zoom toolbar. And if you are a teacher or a student who has a neat project that you've all been working on that you want to share, please feel free to drop that in the Q&A too. And if we have time at the end, I want to share out a few other of those stories as well. We are recording this event and we hope to make it available to you sometime next week. So keep an eye out for that. If you registered or if you have friends who registered but who couldn't make it today, you will get a link to the recording that you can watch later or share with folks around you. This event is brought to you today by EGLE Classroom. This is our environmental education program at EGLE, and this is a place where you can find resources to help you educate your audiences of whatever age they are about Michigan's environment and what you can do to help protect it. So visit us online at michigan.gov/EGLE Classroom to learn more and to sign up for our newsletter to stay tuned to all the events that we have going on. So clean water is critical for all life, and this past October, we marked the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. So this was a critical piece of environmental legislation that has had really profound effects on improving health and quality of life for people and places across the United States. So from October of 2022 until October of 2023, EGLE is celebrating the Year of Clean Water. And we're doing that to highlight the many ways that this piece of legislation not only drives our work as an agency, but also how it positively impacts the lives of Michiganders. So to welcome you to our event today and to tell you a little bit more about the work we do at EGLE and how you can be a part of it, I would like to introduce EGLE's acting director, Mr. Dan Eichinger. Dan has a long history of serving towards conservation at the statewide level. Prior to joining EGLE as our acting director in January of this year, he was serving as the director of the Department of Natural Resources. He's also served as the executive director of the Michigan United Conservation Clubs, as an administrator at Central Michigan University, in other roles at the DNR, and he served as a policy advisor to the Lieutenant Governor John Cherry under the Jennifer Granholm administration. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan to welcome and introduce our event today.
All right. Thanks, Eileen. Good afternoon, everybody. We're so fortunate to have over, by my count on the participants, over 100 folks from the public. And especially I want to welcome our educators and our students who are participating in our Earth Day event today. I want to say a little bit, I know this event typically happens in person. Obviously, the last few years that hasn't been possible, but we are really looking forward to being able to get back together with everybody in person so that we can celebrate Earth Day together as we have in the past. So I'm here and happy to talk a little bit about what we do in the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Our mission here in this agency and everybody who works here, regardless of what program they work on, they are all focused on the mission to protect Michigan's environment and our public health by managing our air, our water, our land, and our energy resources. Some of the ways that we do that are by limiting things like pollutants that might get into the environment by controlling the release and management of pollutants through our permitting process. We go out and inspect facilities for making sure that they're compliant with the regulations that exist here in the state or regulations that may have been promulgated at the federal level. We go out and we conduct investigations and monitoring on spills and emergencies, and we provide response anytime there's an environmental connection to a disaster of some kind or an emergency. Our staff are working out there oftentimes right alongside firefighters and other folks who might be responding to that emergency. We manage air, land, and water quality. We're a very science-heavy agency, so we have a lot of folks that are out in our communities every single day that are monitoring things like air quality, taking water samples and analyzing those samples back at the lab here that we have at our headquarters in Lansing or elsewhere around the state. A very data heavy department that goes out, and we do a lot of field work, a lot of sampling, and a lot of analyzing to make sure that our air is clean, that our water is clean, and that none of those pollutants that we talked about are at harmful levels in our environment. So with this Earth Day celebration, as Eileen said, we've got a really special focus on clean water and celebrating the year of clean water. And as Eileen mentioned, the Clean Water Act was enacted 50 years ago and has served as really the foundation upon which we have built many of our environmental programs in this state to protect our surface water quality, our groundwater, and our drinking water in this state. And so we're really happy that this year, and really proud of the work that all the folks who participate, and you're going to hear about here in just a few minutes, they all really have take different slices of what clean water looks like and are going to present some really cool work and some really cool ideas for all of us that we're going to be able to unpack here in a minute. A lot of our water work happens through our Water Resources division, and that team does a lot of the water quality monitoring and the policy management that I talked about a minute ago. And we've got a lot of water here in the state of Michigan, as everybody who lives here knows. We have 4 Great Lakes and Lake St. Clair. We have over 3,300 miles of shoreline in the state of Michigan. So we have more freshwater coastline than any other state outside of Alaska. We have over 1,200 public beaches. We have 11,000 inland lakes. Now, Minnesota puts the land of 10,000 lakes on their license plate, and we have 1,000 more lakes than they do. So I think we've got bragging rights in the Midwest for having the best inland lakes, being able to brag about having the most and best inland lakes anywhere in the contiguous United States. We also have 76,000 miles of rivers and streams, 6.5 million acres of wetlands, and a lot of groundwater. Now, all of the work that we do to protect our environment and most especially protect our water quality and our water resources, none of that stuff happens alone, and none of that stuff happens in a vacuum. One of the things that I think is really cool about Earth Day, and why it's important, I think, for us to celebrate Earth Day, is that it was a citizen-led initiative that really compelled and forced governments like the state of Michigan, like the federal government, to take very seriously their responsibilities to steward and care for our environment and our natural resources. And Earth Day is really sort of the embodiment of how important and critical an engaged public and an informed public is in helping us to do our work to protect and conserve our natural resources and protect human health. So today is really a day about celebrating what we can all accomplish together. It's not just about talking about programs that we might manage in our department, but really celebrating what we can do when we team up with citizens, when we team up with advocacy groups and stewardship groups who are out helping us do this work on the ground all over the state of Michigan. So we're really proud about the work that we do. I'm really excited about the work that we're going to hear about and the presentations that you're going to see here in just a few minutes. So thanks to all of you who present. Thanks to the young people all over this state who are taking action, not just today, but will continue to take action throughout their lives to help protect Michigan's waterways. And let me hand it back to Eileen, but thanks again for being with all of us today.
Thank you, Dan, so much for that wonderful introduction to Earth Day and what we're here and what we're trying to do this afternoon. So many of you today on this webinar, if you are students, probably don't remember the first Earth Day. So it's worth taking a little look back at the incredible impact that this event has had on the health of people and the planet. Like Dan said, 53 years ago, when the first Earth Day happened, we did not have an environmental protection agency. We didn't have EGLE. We had virtually no environmental regulations at all in the United States. And sites like you're seeing here of smog-filled cities and rivers lighting on fire from chemical pollution and hazardous waste dump sites were more common than we would have liked at the time. So the first Earth Day took place in 1970 as the result of concerned advocates, educators, policymakers, and everyday people who decided to stand up and create the change that they knew we needed to protect people's health and to protect the environment. That first Earth Day in 1970 inspired 20 million people, which is 10% of the total US population at the time. It's really huge, to march, to learn, and to advocate for change. Those actions had a huge effect. And by the end of 1970, that same year, the EPA had been formed. We had the Clean Air Act. We had the National Environmental Protection Act. Within 5 years, we also saw the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act. And by the end of that decade, we had the Toxic Substances Control Act, the Superfund Act. These are the major environmental laws that were passed with virtually no political opposition at that time, which is really incredible. And they form the cornerstone of the work that we do here at EGLE and that we do in partnership with all of you. So as a result of those regulations, we have much cleaner skies, clear water. We've seen these hazardous waste locations cleaned up and converted to beneficial uses. We still have work to do, but we have the tools to do that work now. But these things haven't happened, as both Dan and I have said, as a result of just regulators or just legislation. They've happened because people of all kinds and all ages did more than just talk about how somebody should really change things around here. They actually stood up and took action themselves. And many of the people involved in this type of work over the long history of this work have been young people, like many of you who are signing on as students today. I am a really firm believer in the power that youth voice and youth action hold to imagine a better world and create change in our communities. And I've worked with youth like you all long enough to know that you are not just the leaders of tomorrow. The youth around Michigan and the country and the world are really leading the way towards creating healthier waterways, healthier communities, healthier environments as a whole. And today you'll get to hear from a few of those young people who I hope will inspire you to take action in your own community. We have two driving questions for our time together today. First, we know that our waterways are still facing some challenges despite all the progress that has been made. So we want to think about what those challenges are. And second, once we understand the challenges, we want to know what is it that we and you can do to help protect and improve Michigan's waterways. We are going to dive into those questions by hearing from a series of EGLE staff about some of the challenges that they see and they work on in relation to Michigan's water and what their work does to address those challenges. They will have 3 very short minutes to introduce their topic. And after you hear about each clean water issue, you'll hear a 5 to 7 minute presentation from either a teacher or a group of students that highlights the work they've done to address that particular issue in their own community. There are more than 4 challenges that Michigan's waterways face, but we're focusing on some where students are really making a difference today. So we'll hear about sedimentation and nutrient enrichment from Autumn Mitchell, who's an educator and one of our staff in our non-point source unit. We'll also hear from students at Hamady Middle School. We'll hear about the impact of bacteria in our waterways from one of our aquatic biologists, Molly Ripke, as well as from students at Grand Rapids Montessori. We will hear about the impact of chloride contamination from Kevin Goodwin, also one of our aquatic biologists, and from high school students in Sault Ste. Marie. And finally, we'll hear about the threat of aquatic invasive species from our aquatic biologist, Kevin Walters, as well as some of the outreach work done by students at East Jordan High School. So let's get started. I am now going to hand it off to Autumn Mitchell in our non-point source unit to tell you about some of the issues surrounding nutrients and sediment, or as she likes to call it, brown water, green weeds. So Autumn, I am handing it off to you.
Thanks, Eileen. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Autumn Mitchell, and I work for the Non-Point Source Program in the Water Resources Division. And the Non-Point Source Program works to restore and protect Michigan's lakes and streams. We're the experts people turn to for solving specific types of pollution problems, and that's non-point source pollution. That's pollution from sources that are difficult to see or point out. So 2 major types of non-point source pollutants, like Eileen said, are sediment and nutrients. And my presentation is titled Brown Water, Green Weeds because sediment entering the water can turn it brown and nutrients entering the water can turn it green. So how does that happen and why is that a problem? So a stream is a really complex system and little changes, little impacts make big changes. And so as nutrients and sediments enter the stream, and these are things like fertilizers, poop, soil from external sources, that makes it difficult for organisms to survive. So here's how. As sediment and nutrients enter the stream, the sediment is a suspended solid and blocks the sunlight. And it blocks the sunlight from reaching the organisms below that need it. So the sediment also absorbs the sun's heat, excuse me, and it causes the water to get too warm for some organisms. Aquatic organisms love oxygen, but warmer water holds less dissolved oxygen than the cold. And sediment can also clog fish gills, alter spawning habitat, and make it difficult for fish to see and find their food. Excess nutrients cause the same issues as sediment, but they also can increase algal growth and plant growth to the point where it becomes a problem. As plants die off, they decompose, and extra bacteria uses up even more oxygen during the decomposition process. As you can see, this lack of oxygen becomes a big problem for things that live in the water. But what does that mean for us? Well, we're all connected. Biodiversity is a great thing that provides us a lot of great ecosystem services like our food, our water, our own oxygen. It prevents flooding, it prevents disease, it prevents climate change, and it provides us recreational and cultural values as well. But if we have low dissolved oxygen, we get low biodiversity, and then we don't have those ecosystem services to help us out anymore. And that can change the way we live. It can change where we decide to live, and it can change, how much money we make and those sorts of things. So you're probably wondering, how does this get into the water in the first place? Think about where you live. Do you live in a city? Do you live in an agricultural community or a neighborhood? Are there construction areas or manufacturing areas near you? Water travels downhill. So when it rains and when it snows, it picks up anything on the landscape along the way. And those little particles like sediment and nutrients are really easy to pick up in that water. It travels downhill to the nearest stream or lake. So take a moment and think about where your nearest lake or stream is. And then think about what it is that you do outside or what you might leave outside that could impact that. So a few examples for where sediment might come from would be farm fields that are tilled, construction zones with bare soil, or bare soil, pretty much anywhere. Flooding also significantly increases the amount of sediment that can flow into our waterways. Nutrients can come from fertilizers and organic waste like leaves and grasses or animal waste, septic systems, even sewage overflows. But how do you help? We go to the source typically. That's the best place to start. Think about what you're using outside, like I said. Do you pick up your pet waste? Are you using fertilizers sparingly and caringly, we say? Are you applying them before rain, or right before rain wouldn't be so great, but many days before, if you do have to apply them, would be better. Does your family have a septic system? And if so, are they maintaining that every 3 to 5 years? If you have a big lawn in your schoolyard or even at home or in wherever you play or work, that lawn, if it were reduced and planted with native vegetation, native plants, that could also help reduce non-point source pollution. There's a lot of other ways that you can help too. When I worked for a watershed coalition, a watershed group prior to coming to EGLE, we worked with teachers around our community to take students to the stream and test the water, and then those students took that information and made differences in their communities. So you could also work with your local watershed group or find other people who are also helping out with water quality and join forces, and that really will help you make a really big impact. So with that, we'd like to share a video from Mrs. Wiley, which is one of our teachers that I worked with previously, and some of her students about what they did in their communities.
Thank you so much, Autumn. So now let's hear from Mrs. Wiley and her students at Hamady Middle School about the actions they took to address nutrients and sediment in their watershed.
My name is Tammy Wiley. I'm from Hamady Middle High School in Flint, Michigan, in Genesee County. One of the questions that we have used as a driving question this year and in years past is, where does our stormwater go? With where does our stormwater go, we had students learn how water quality affects the rivers, and we asked, the first question of the school year was, what grade our Flint River and what do you think it was graded at? Then we taught students from the Bridges Green curriculum how to water quality test and what each part of the water quality test means. We also hiked the Pine River and tested on the Pine River, or Pine Run Creek, excuse me, in Clio, and then hiked the bike path next to it to identify outfalls and where water could become contaminated. One of my favorite community partners is the Flint River Watershed Coalition, and we used their Bridges Green curriculum. We also worked with them and did storm drain stenciling after they water quality tested. One of the other activities we do around water is salmon in the classroom through the DNR. We get our eggs in the fall, and students are responsible to raise them and water quality test and change the water and feed the fish. And then in late April, early May, we release the fish into the Flint River.
I'm Zion. I went with Miss Wiley to do the water quality testing in the fall. I remember it was real cool and fun. It's a little bit cold and it started to rain at one point, but it was still cool.
Learning about water quality, it helped me like follow testing instructions, and it helped me like when I get older, if I get my own house, like help me like test my own water.
This is one of those projects where students that normally don't thrive in a classroom setting shine. Two of the three students in the creek, this really caught their attention, and we saw grades in other classes change because of their activity in the green program.
I liked how you could like do it yourself because it's like instructions that came with it. Even though Miss Wiley told us a lot about what we needed to do, we had like all of us had like partners, so we were able to do it with a friend, and the test had like a ton of stuff that you just like put in the water, and for the pH one, it like changed colors, so it was pretty cool.
One of the activities that we also do is a schoolyard cleanup, and we do it for what would you do for a Klondike bar. We go out, we document what we cleaned up, and we clean up the entire yard, and then from there we start doing our research. We create awareness posters of what is it that we can do to help. In the 8th grade science class, did GIS, Geographic Information Systems tracking, and they looked at where our storm drains in our schoolyard and across the street in the subdivision, where did those go and where do they end up?
I learned that all the water comes from the creeks and from the storm drains, so it's all gonna come together.
All our water ends up in the Flint River.
They went out in the subdivision across the street after finding them and stenciled all of the drains so that people were aware of where their drain leads to.
My favorite part is probably the stenciling because you have to walk around and spray ground on the ground.
This is one of the end products from the Bridges Green curriculum where students are looking at what is in a drop of water.
I feel like it's a very fun experience to do. It was very, like, I learned a lot from it.
I would say once you get here, you're gonna miss the class when you leave.
Did you get in the Flint River?
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I definitely got in the Flint River. Me and Sammy actually was
Cool.
That was so great hearing firsthand about students getting in the river and experiencing our water resources and studying them and taking that information on with them into the future. So next, we're going to hear about another clean water issue that might prevent people from being able to do that. So we now have Molly Ripke from EGLE's Surface Water Assessment Unit ready to talk to us about the impact that E. coli can have. So Molly, go ahead and take it away.
Good afternoon. My job is to monitor levels of E. coli in rivers and lakes. Now, E. coli is a disease-causing microscopic bacteria. So it's a pathogen, and it actually lives in our digestive systems quite well. But it can be dangerous. It can be dangerous in itself, but probably more importantly, it has some really gross and dangerous friends like viruses and parasites, protozoa. Think words that you never want to hear from your doctor, like giardia and dysentery. Ew. So these guys are part of our natural ecosystem, and they're all over the place. But if they get where they don't belong, if you drink them by accident or eat them, or they enter the body in any other way, like on an open wound, they can make you sick. You can get an infection or even worse. Too much E. coli in the water will ruin your day at the beach because it can be closed for your safety, because people and pets can get sick from ingesting it. So where does it come from? Long story short, it comes from poop, what we call feces. That's the science word. E. coli in rivers and lakes gets there because all animals poop. We're talking about all mammals and all birds, all warm-blooded animals. Some sources to think about when you're driving around the countryside or wherever it is that you live in the city. Think about things like livestock, horses and cows, the pastures that they have. Think about feedlots and the large amounts of manure that have to be spread on agricultural fields. Humans contribute to the problem too by the way we use the land and water. We cause problems pretty directly by leaving trash behind. And we don't always treat our sewage properly either. So raw sewage can be discharged into lakes and rivers as well. Any pet waste that you leave outside, we contribute to the problem. And the other thing about humans is that we attract wildlife. Wildlife like raccoons that live in the sewers and geese that love the open parkland, and they love to be at the beach, seagulls as well. So what can we do to help? Everybody can do something. E. coli levels, as I mentioned, tend to be higher in areas where people live. And that's because we keep livestock and we keep pets and we change the land. So one of the most important things is just to think, educate yourself and others. Find out where your wastewater goes. Does it go to a wastewater treatment plant, or does it go to a septic system? And if it goes to a septic system, is it being maintained properly? And water from rainstorms, like Autumn talked about, goes into our rivers and lakes, and it will take all the grossness and disgusting stuff that's on the land and move it to the water. So it's really important to put trash where it belongs. Remember not to feed the wildlife. It's so tempting to want to feed the geese or the seagulls at the beach, but please don't. And clean up after your pets, whether they are big or small.
Thank you, Molly. That was a great introduction to what the students in 4th through 6th grade at Grand Rapids Montessori have been learning and what they have been doing. So let's see what these young folks have to share in the video that they have created for us.
My name is Naomi, and I'm in 5th grade. My name is Simone, and I'm in 6th grade. I am Julian, and I'm in 6th grade also. And we're from Grand Rapids Montessori. We're going to be talking about storm drains, and Simone's going to be starting us off. So basically what we learned about storm drains is the water from the storm drain goes into the river past the sewers. Leaves can clog the storm drain. Only rain in the drain, which basically means don't put trash in the storm drain. And trash and oil and drains can kill fish and help keep storm drains clean. Now, Naomi.
Problems about in storm drains. Leaves can clog up, same with dirt. Poop is really bad. Oil, trash, and plastic are really bad for the fish. Our solutions are trash cans, signs, artwork, and videos on YouTube. And these are 2 pictures of artwork on like streets. and now Julian.
So poop is a major problem for storm drains. It can poop in water causes bacteria and algae. E. coli is a bacteria. It's caused by poop. Too much algae is harmful to fish and people. Algae and bacteria can be harmful to pets and people, and it's pretty gross to swim in poop water and algae. And this is one of our signs that's around the storm drains at school, which it's there to show people that it goes to Lake Michigan and that you shouldn't put stuff in there. Then here's our little storm drain here. And yeah, now we can on to the next part. Okay. This is a diagram of where water goes. It's the runoff, and it goes into the storm drain, and it goes into the pipes and all the way to the river, and that goes to, well, what we call Lake Michigan, and at some point it goes to the ocean. So we don't want any dirt, poop, trash, plastic, any of that nasty stuff. And then this is me and Julian last year cleaning the storm drain. Just clean and pick up after your pets and yourself.
It sounds like those students are really busy. They're doing a lot of great work to protect our waterways. That one always puts a smile on my face. Just clean up after yourselves. Next up, we have Kevin Goodwin, another of our aquatic biologists in our surface water assessment section. And he is going to talk a little bit about chloride pollution or salt in our streams, rivers, wetlands, and lakes. So I will turn it over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Eileen. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, so I'm going to talk about salts in our waters. The technical term is chloride, but we'll just talk about kind of salty waters, why they're salty, why we care about that, and what you can do to help. So next slide, please. So the first thing let's talk about is why chloride, why salts in our lakes and streams and rivers and wetlands matters, why we care. And the primary thing is because it actually can kill things that live in those streams. It can hurt the biology that lives in these streams. There are particular things like insects, mussels, freshwater mussels, and even fish at certain levels can be hurt by the presence of salts in our waters. Salt is also not good for irrigation that's used on plants and things like that, which we have a ton of here in Michigan. And so that's another effect that can happen from salts in our waters. And ultimately, if that water is used for drinking at some level, salts in our drinking water are not good either, for all the reasons that low salt in your diet is important. So we are concerned about all of these things in Michigan, as you heard the director talk about, kind of our charge to protect not only the environment, but also people's health. And salt can affect all of those. So where does it come from? Next slide, please. So we know that most of the salts that can get to our rivers, lakes, and streams come from, we call here road salt applications. So de-icing, salt that you use in the winter to melt ice on your sidewalks, your driveways, the roads. And so this de-icing salt is one of the main ways that this salt gets into our water bodies. And it does that through the things you've already heard about from people with runoff and everything moving downhill into our streams and lakes. That's the same thing that carries salt into our streams. Salt also comes from water softeners in your house, from places like wastewater treatment plants, cleaning products, other things. But the real main ones that we see in northern states like ours is coming from road salt and other de-icing salts that we put for safety in the wintertime. Next slide, please. So let's talk about what we can do. And I think this is a really important one, especially when we talk about road salt, because there's so much that everyone can do either at your own property or as part of a community. Now, certainly on the big scale, organizations like the Michigan Department of Transportation, those big trucks that you see out on the highways, are always looking at ways that they can both maintain safety for Michiganders, but also do what they do better, do it more efficiently with better technology. So that they're doing their part in trying to figure out how to control some of this. And now it's figuring out how we and you can help as well. You can do this on your own property by understanding ways to properly apply salt on your sidewalk and on your steps and on your driveway. You can make sure you're talking to your friends and neighbors about this. And keep an eye out in your community, and that's your schoolyard, your gym, your shopping centers and churches. When you go and see scenes like these pictures here, and I think we've all seen this in the wintertime, that's usually an indication that too much salt is being used, and there's ways to maybe do this more efficiently. So as a community member, as somebody both within your house, your school, and the broader community, you can learn how to apply that information or apply salts better. A great place for information that looks like it was just put in the chat is this Wisconsin SaltWise. So Wisconsin's got a great pile of information on how to apply salts little more safely to still get that safe salt removal, but also protect our environment as well. And that's things like shoveling earlier in a storm, so you don't have to use as much salt to get rid of snow. You can do it with a shovel. Being better at scattering salt a little more lightly than these piles that you see in this picture. Switching to some products. Some places salt isn't the best product to use. Sometimes sand is better. Sometimes other kinds of de-icers work better than just salt does. And if you do see places where there's too much salt, once everything's melted and you're left with these big piles, sweep it up. You can sweep it up and reuse it, or you can recycle it in places that'll take that as well. And then the important thing for all of us in our communities is to speak up. Again, let folks know the potential problems with salting too much. That's not just an issue of safety, that's important, but also it can have real lasting environment impacts as well. So speak up, help educate your friends and neighbors, and do what you can at school to help affect a change. And you can be a part of that solution.
Thank you, Kevin. That was a great introduction to the next video we have. So we're headed up to the UP to hear about what some students in Mrs. Hindy's class at Sioux Area High School did to investigate chloride pollution in their community. And this is a really neat story of students who have been doing some really interesting research and who are working alongside some of our EGLE staff to help us understand the issue better. So this is a change of pace. We got a couple of high school students on here giving us more of kind of a research-based presentation than we saw with our fourth and fifth grade students. So here are the students looking at chlorides.
Hi, this is Odin and Cam, and we are from Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and are currently juniors at Sioux High. For natural resources, we travel to Lake Superior State's University's Center for Freshwater Research and Education, plus fish hatchery. There we conduct all of our classroom activities and stuff like that, so it's pretty cool. Our Ashman Creek project is located on the I-75 business spur, where we actually have our MyWaterNet sensor, which actually recorded the abnormally large spikes in conductivity and chloride, which got us onto this project. And so that's pretty cool. And take it away.
And so what our class has done is we have identified the huge issue of the acute and chronic toxicity that has been shown in Ashman Creek. These insanely high chloride levels and conductivity levels are detrimental to the life and plants surrounding the stream. And we think this issue has mostly been caused by the use of road salt on the I-75's business spur, along with the insane amount of road salt that Walmart uses in their large parking lot, which Ashman Creek runs right next to. We presented these findings to EGLE when they came and visited us at our Center for Natural Resource Research and Education. And they came up with the idea of using more sand instead of road salt to help with, grip and slippage. Now there are a few different pros and cons to using sand instead of salt. One of the pros is sand is easier to filter out of the runoff that comes from the parking lots and the road and ends up in Ashman Creek. But the salt, it's harder to filter out the dissolved salt than it is sand and dirt. But on the other hand, salt is considered safer than sand when it comes to melting the snow and ice, and is overall a safety concern for people and cars in general. So we are not advocating for the complete ban of road salt, but rather the informed use on how much and where and when to properly apply this road salt, in order to effectively decrease the amount of chloride in Ashman Creek and streams around. And so here, if we go to our slideshow here, share. So here is us in Ashman Creek looking for macroinvertebrates so that we can identify the stream quality, the water quality in the Ashman Creek. And we decided to start this project because of our MyWaterNet sensor that showed this huge spike in conductivity, which is an insane amount of conductivity and should never occur in any stream, which spikes in curiosity. So we started taking samples throughout different spots in the stream in order to measure this chloride and conductivity. Here you can see us measuring the conductivity and one of the water samples. And these are the chloride strips that we used to identify the levels of chloride in that site of the stream. Now, there were two different types of strips we used to identify this chloride. This was the high range strip. And so the high range strip goes from 281 milligrams per liter all the way up to 6,000, just above 6,000. Now, as you can see on this graph, this was our specific conductivity. And this high point up here was an outlier and actually exceeded the range of the high range chloride strips, which is astronomical. And then, as you can see here, this is the head of Ashman Creek. This pipe comes from just behind the Ford dealership, and then this pipe comes from the Walmart settling pond, where all of the Walmart's runoff and water ends up. And so this site, the Walmart settling pond site, is our highest chloride concentration site, which is at minimum above the acute toxicity level of 680 milligrams per liter, whereas the pipe coming from the Ford dealership is lower than the chronic toxicity level, showing that this is most likely the cause of our problem. Here is underneath the I-75 business spur. These two pipes collect the runoff from the road and pipe it down into Ashman Creek. This is Ashman Creek down here. This is the north pipe and this is the south pipe. Now the south pipe was the north pipe was our second highest level, which was on average higher than the acute toxicity level. Even the lowest amount on the lowest day was still above acute toxicity, which is a little bit interesting because on the south storm drain, this pipe, the roundabout is that way. And you would think they use more road salt on the roundabout than they would regular on the road. But apparently not. And so this is.
Whoops. Sorry, I paused him.
Our final steps. And so we as a class identified the problem, started to collect data, and we are now communicating our findings to EGLE and others. And so now these are on our list for what we need to do in the future. And we thank you guys for your cooperation with us, and we hope to get something done with this project for sure. All right, thank you. Yep.
It is really cool to see students working together with our EGLE staff to address some of these problems and to make a difference. And as you can see, there are students of all kinds, of all ages, in all different parts of the state who are working on these problems. So these were some students in a career technical program who are doing some really great research, and hopefully one day we can recruit them to come work with us at EGLE and help support our work. So our final clean water issue that we're going to look at today is aquatic invasive species. And to tell you a little bit more about those, we have another aquatic biologist with us here, also named Kevin. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Walters.
All right, thanks, Eileen. Appreciate that. Welcome, students and teachers. Appreciate you guys having us here to talk about these things and sharing some of your work. So let's talk about aquatic invasive species for a few minutes here, and let's start by defining what an aquatic invasive species is. There's really two parts to the definition, and I'm going to break that down for you here in a minute. The first part is invasive species are non-native, so they are not originally or historically from Michigan. But then there's a very important second part of that definition, and that is invasive species cause harm or are likely to cause harm to Michigan's economy, environment, or human health. So we have many non-native species in Michigan, including fruits and vegetables, field crops, livestock, domestic animals that are very important to our economy and our lifestyle. But most non-native species are not harmful, and they actually provide many economic benefits to us. Invasive species, on the other hand, are also non-native, but they cause harm. They cause harm in several different ways and potentially to the economy, environment, and human health. And I'm going to show you that in just a second on the next slide. But first, here at the bottom, just a few examples that you may or may not be familiar with. On the left is a red swamp crayfish. Michigan has several species of native crayfish, but unfortunately, we now also have a couple of species of invasive crayfish that don't belong in Michigan, and this is one of them. This is a rusty crayfish. In the middle, we have a silver carp, which is one of multiple species of invasive carp. You may have heard of invasive carp. And the picture in the middle is a silver invasive carp. And then finally on the right is something called a quagga mussel. It's an invasive mussel, similar to a zebra mussel that many of you may have heard of, but this one is an invasive quagga mussel. Next slide, Eileen. Okay, so what is the problem? How do these things cause harm? We know that they're not native, but how do they cause harm? And I'm going to use zebra mussels as an example for each of the categories that I mentioned: the economy, the environment, and human health. So on the left, you see a water pipe, a cross-section of a water pipe that is clogged with invasive zebra mussels. So whenever there is any hard substrate in the water where zebra mussels inhabit, they will attach to that hard substrate in very dense numbers. And here inside this water pipe, they're actually clogging the inside of the water pipe enough to restrict water flow, which is a problem if somebody's trying to draw water from a water source. And so this costs money in Michigan, millions of dollars every year to clean out water intake pipes from things like invasive zebra mussels. So that's a harm to Michigan's economy, the money we spend clearing things like zebra mussels. In the middle, you'll see some zebra mussels attached to the shells of a native species of clam. And this is my example of how invasive species can harm the environment. So a native clam species, if you know anything about clams, is they like to bury themselves down in the mud and the sand, the bottom of lakes and rivers and streams. And then they will stick a tube out to feed on water in the water column, and they ingest microscopic things for food. Well, when they get invasive zebra mussels attached to their shell, it makes it difficult for that clam to open its shell and to feed the way it normally would. It also makes it very difficult for this clam to hide from predators like raccoons that like to feed on clams. And so here is a clear example of zebra mussels impacting native species, a harm to the environment. And then on the right, this is actually kind of hard to see in the picture, but this is actually a beach almost entirely covered with zebra mussel shells. And if you know anything about zebra mussel shells, or if you've picked them up before, or if you've stepped on them before, like on this beach, you know that they have some very sharp and pokey edges. And so here is what may seem like a pretty benign potential harm to human health, but trust me, you would not want to walk on this beach with bare feet. And so there's a potential harm to human health here from zebra mussels littering the beach. Next slide. Where do they come from? Well, there's lots of places that invasive species and aquatic invasive species in particular come from. A couple of things I want to highlight is, one, how connected we are as a world now. The bottom left map is a picture of global shipping routes. And so you can see the United States and even Michigan is connected to all different parts of the entire world through the shipping of goods, clothing, food, building materials, raw materials. I could show you a similar map of air traffic routes. Airplanes connect the world today like they haven't ever before in the past. And so there's all these pathways for invasive species to move from one continent to another. And then even on a much smaller scale, even within Michigan here, there's ways for invasive species to move from water body to water body, from lake to lake. And the example on the right is, of course, a boat on a trailer, a recreational watercraft, something we might go out and go tubing behind, or go swimming off of, or fishing off of. But when we do that, we have to be aware that we could potentially be bringing along inadvertent aquatic hitchhikers or invasive species from lake to lake. You can see this particular boat and trailer is covered with weeds and then some brown muck and who knows what else. And if you're moving this boat between water bodies, there's a chance that you're moving aquatic invasive species from one lake to another. Next slide, please. And lastly, what can we do? Well, I will distill it down into 3 words for you. It's clean, drain, and dry. So if you use a boat, or you have a boat in your family, or if you have any toys or recreational gear that you use in the water, whether it's a paddle board or a canoe or fishing gear, fishing nets, waders, any of that stuff, when you're done using it for the day, the most important thing you can do that's really simple is to clean it. So remove anything that's not supposed to be on it, mud, weeds, any kind of debris. Drain it. So if you have a boat, pull that drain plug, drain all the water out, leave that water behind at the lake where you got it. Don't bring it to the next lake. And then lastly, dry it. Dry it off. Let it air dry out in the sun, and use a towel and wipe down the sides of that hull, wipe off your wet fishing gear. So clean, drain, dry. And then on the right, many of you may have pets at home, or maybe even in the classroom. And the best thing you can do there is enjoy those pets, but do not ever release them into the wild. You can usually bring those things to a pet store, and pet stores can either take them from you or hook you up with a program that takes unwanted pets. And with that, I think we're ready to hear about some students who did some aquatic invasive species work.
Yes, thank you so much, Kevin. So we have a great example as our last student project to highlight today of students at East Jordan High School who did some great work led by their teacher, Anna Walker, to educate their communities and their classmates about preventing the spread of aquatic invaders. So we're going to hear from these students, and then we will wrap up our webinar after that.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Walker, and I have been an educator for the past 17 years. I have worked at both East Jordan and I'm currently now in Petoskey High School. And I was asked today to talk about some experiences that I offered with my students that have to do with aquatic invasive species. It all started when I was invited to attend a workshop through C-Free at LSSU called Invading Classrooms. And the whole point of this educator workshop was to provide teachers with tools to help them take action and increase awareness of aquatic invasive species in their particular communities. Part of the objectives include helping educators build awareness and their knowledge of aquatic invasive species. You can see me in the bottom left corner there, identifying invasive species along the side of the road. We also partnered with the local SISMA and were involved in a frog bit pull, which was a really cool professional learning experience. In addition to that, a second objective was for students in Northern Michigan to increase their own awareness of aquatic invasive species by impacting their local community and challenging them to implement an action plan to help address those issues that are unique to their area. The third and final objective was through those student led community steward projects that would hopefully help increase understanding of how invasive species spread and therefore provide preventative actions to stop introductions to those new areas. So as a teacher, I was tasked with the challenge of how I was going to incorporate aquatic invasive species into my curriculum. East Jordan is located within the Lake Charlevoix Rivershed, and the East Jordan River flows directly into Lake Charlevoix. And so, which isn't that far from the high school. So my students were introduced to aquatic invasive species through an invasive species awareness day. As part of this kickoff, I had students cycle through a series of stations that involved both beach cleanup, identifying native and invasive species, as well as learning about invasive species from local conservation groups. I had the Cake SISMA, Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council, and Little Traverse Conservancy all there to share about how their organizations work with invasive species and what they are doing to combat the problem. So once I got my students excited about learning more about aquatic invasive species, then came their challenge. And I challenged my students to come up with a way to have an impact on their community and the aquatic invasive species that spread there. So they came up with this idea to apply for a Clean Boats, Clean Waters grant to promote a boat washing sign that they were going to place at the newly finished marina right at the mouth of the Jordan River. And along with that, they created promotional materials, including this sticker, which you see where native species are the goat, clean your boat, to further promote the idea of aquatic invasive species awareness. My students didn't stop there. They were also excited and wanted to share more about what they knew about aquatic invasive species. And so they mentored younger students during an environmental species awareness day. So when we presented our sign, which you can see there, my students, we had a ribbon cutting ceremony, invited members from the community to come and listen to their presentation about their concerns about aquatic invasive species. And then you also notice the other pictures show us at the elementary school. And so there was a series of stations that my students designed and then carried out for elementary school students throughout the day that taught them everything there is to know about aquatic invasive species, everything from washing their boat to the impact that invasive species can have on their environment. At the very end of the school year, we also partnered with the third grade students and helped to remove a large swath of Vinca minor from one of our area trails. So these are just a handful of the things that my students learned, and it was a really cool opportunity as an educator to see students take a leadership role and not only learn about aquatic invasive species, but share that information with younger students and their community as well.
That was a great example of, again, young people working with their teacher to make a difference. And we have some very cool ways that we recognize young people around the state for doing that. One of them is our Environmental Service Award, which is an award that we give out annually to students in middle and high school for service to the environment, for projects that positively benefit wildlife and human health and the environment in Michigan. And so stay tuned for the announcement of that award this year coming up later this week. So I'm really inspired to hear what all of these young people have been doing, whether it's protecting water quality, improving habitats, recycling, reducing waste, performing outreach in their communities. And today you heard just 4 relatively short stories of what students are doing all around Michigan. But I just want to point out that yesterday we announced 306 schools across the state who were certified as official Michigan Green schools. And that means that each of those 306 schools has undertaken some really significant stewardship activities at their school. And we know that there's even more schools that are doing work that didn't apply to become part of the Green Schools program here. So there's so much happening. You can absolutely, no matter what age you are or where you live, make a difference in protecting Michigan's environment too. So as we close, I want you to just think about, based on the things that you've learned today, what is it that you want to take forward to help act on to become a better steward of Michigan's waterways? If you're a teacher or a non-formal educator who's looking for some support as you inspire your own students or your own audiences to work to protect the environment, please check out EGLE Classroom. We have lots of resources that can help you, whether it's materials you can borrow, whether it's curriculum you can use in your classroom, whether it's professional learning. We have a lot of ways to help you out, and we want to do that and support your work. So please visit us at michigan.gov/EGLE Classroom to access anything listed on the slides here, and feel free to reach out to me directly at any time for help. My contact information is listed here. It's been wonderful hearing from our staff and students. We are at time, so we're not going to take any questions right now, but if you have questions that you need help with, please feel free to reach out to me directly using my contact information here or emailing egleclassroom@michigan.gov. You can expect a follow-up email from us within the next few days, early next week, that will have a link to the recording. We can share slides with you, and I will share contact information for all of our presenters. So with that, I would like to thank you all for attending and wish you all a very happy Earth Day this weekend.